Mr. Bente, could you state for the recording what war and branch of service you served in?
I was World War II in the Army,
And what was your rank?
Staff Sergeant
And where did you serve?
in Europe. Oh,
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
no, I was drafted
And when was that?
in 1943
Okay. Where were you living at the time?
in Cleveland, Ohio,
And how old were you?
18.
18 years old. What were you doing at the time? Were you in school? Or?
I was in high school.
Okay. Did
We graduated in June, and I was in the Army in July.
Did you have a choice of the branch of service?
I was trying to get into the Marines, but my eyesight kept me out. So then I was drafted and went into the Army in the ASTP program
So you were going to enlist.
in the Marines.
Okay, okay. Where did you go for your training?
In Fort McClellan, Alabama.
And do you remember? Do you have any recollections of that?
It was hot. Fort McClellan was very hot. It was we went there in July and was down there for 12 weeks. And it was very warm. We did a lot of walking and a lot of firing of infantry weapon because it was the infantry. But it's been a long time, and I remember we didn't have a lot of uniforms, and at one time the officers complained that the men smelled, and they said, well, we have to smell because we only got one uniform. And then we finally got extra uniforms so that we could wash them and change them.
Was it a difficult experience? Were they tough on you?
A little bit. It wasn't that difficult, but it was hard physically. Trying to get in condition in 12 weeks is pretty hard.
Do you remember the instructors? What were they like? Anybody stand out in your mind?
No, they were.
Okay. Do you think the training prepared you for what was to come?
Not the basic training, no.
Were you sent somewhere else after that before you got your orders?
Well, from Alabama, I went to North Dakota, and I was in school in this ASTP program, that's the Army Specialized Training Program. We were to go into training program for 2 years and then be commissioned an officer, but things got a little warm, and then program was disbanded, and we were sent. That's when I was sent to the Rainbow Division.
How were you picked for the training?
Just from school, grades
okay.
in school and
I see.
stuff like that.
Okay, so then you were assigned to the Rainbow Division. And what happened then?
Well, we went into training in Camp Gruber. That's Camp Gruber, Oklahoma.
Oklahoma.
And we were in training there for several months before we got orders to, close up shop and then be shipped over to Europe.
What was the training like there? Was it more specialized?
It was more advanced training. It did more infantry training, going into situations, and did night training, daytime training, and.
Did that prepare you a little better then?
Oh, much better.
Okay, and then when that was finished, what was the next step?
Well, we boarded a train and were shipped to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey. From there, we boarded ships and went to France, to Marseilles.
What were your feelings when you first got there?
In France?
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't too impressed with France.
No? Can you tell me why?
Well, we landed at Marseilles, and Marseilles is a mixture of everybody in the world, I think, comes in through Marseilles, because it's coming in, from Africa, and the people were poor. The country had been at war, and everything was cold. It was getting to be winter time, and like I say, the people were poor, and the kids would run alongside, looking for food and trying to sell you different things. So, which included more than just goods, but it was dirty. I think France was very dirty. I was not impressed with France.
Where exactly did you go from Marseille?
Oh, well, that's where we had that map. We went to Marseille. We boarded boxcars, and that's how we traveled from France, from Marseille up to the Maginot Line, where we along the Rhine River, and we were on one side of the Rhine, and the Germans were on the other side, in the Maginot Line.
What was your rank at that time?
I was probably private first class.
And what were your living conditions?
Well, we lived in the Maginot Line. We lived in the Maginot Line, and other times we sometimes had houses to live in, but most of the time we just lived on the ground, in not, well, you didn't put up your tents, you just slept on the ground.
Was the food adequate? Did you have supplies?
No, we had K rations. The K rations is just a very simple ration, crackers and cans of food, and something to make coffee or lemonade or something like that. No, I don't think the food was adequate. I thought they treated the troops very poorly.
Well, and you said that it was starting to get cold when you arrived.
It was very cold.
So did you have things to keep you warm, or were the uniforms kind of scanty in the beginning?
No, the first night we landed in Marseille, they put us up on top of a hill, and it was very cold. And I think the first night, about 99% of the people got up and put on their long underwear. It was so cold.
Good thing you had it.
Yeah. And I don't think we took it off then for the rest of the winter.
Did you see a lot of combat?
We saw quite a bit, because we went through, like I said, we were in the Maginot Line, and there was a little firing back and forth. It wasn't too much because the Germans, like I say, were over here and we were over on the other side, and they just, every occasionally you'd hear some shooting going on and some artillery. And but we didn't really start getting into combat until we left the Maginot Line and started to advance.
Were there a lot of casualties in your, is it a unit? Or
I was in Company I and the 222nd Infantry, and we experienced quite a few casualties. A lot of the casualties occurred from artillery. Artillery bombardment. It's just almost like being bombed with an airplane, artillery hitting. And I think that was probably the worst we went through, was artillery.
Was it constant? Were there times that it would let up?
Or, oh yeah. So no, it wasn't constant.
Were you able to rest at all?
If you could sleep on the ground or in the snow.
You had no protection then. Were you in foxholes?
Yes, we had to, every time we stopped, we had to dig a foxhole. And so we moved up to some other place, and we had to dig another foxhole. And the ground was hard because it was frozen. And I think you get to the point that you're cold and you don't really care that much anymore. Sometimes you get to the feeling you'd just as soon go back home.
Yeah. Did it get easier for you? Or did you just start becoming numb to the...
Well, you kind of get used to it. You didn't have it all the time. Occasionally we would, stay in a barn someplace that we found, or as we went into a town, we might be able to stay in a house someplace. But otherwise, you slept, right in the foxhole.
Will you tell me for the record what medals you received?
Well, we had, the first thing that they gave us were the 3 campaigns. We went through 3 campaigns, and you received a little campaign with, and then if you were in combat, you had a bronze star on the campaign medals. And I think some of them we had more than one, because of the different campaigns. And then I received the Purple Heart and Bronze Star, and the Presidential Citation, and the Victory Medal. I mean, I think everybody got that.
Can you tell me about the occasion? Was the Purple Heart and the Presidential Citation for the same assignment or battle?
No, not really. The Presidential Citation was over a period of about 2 days. That was, you remember up north they had the Battle of the Bulge?
Yes.
Well, in the south we got a little bit of remnants of the attacking from the Germans. And they, for about a day and a half or 2 days, there was a very heavy attack from the Germans. From the Germans, and that's where the citation came from, because of the combat we had to endure.
Are you able to talk about it? Can you tell me a little bit about it? What was your objective?
We were just supposed to hold lines, not fall back. We had to. We had a line. Our line were stretched very thin. The troops were. There was not an overabundance of infantrymen, and we assigned a sector, and we had to hold it. And that's when the Germans attacked, and you had to, stay there.
Were you outnumbered?
Yes, we were outnumbered, but we were in one position, and they were coming forward, and we were able to hold the line.
And on the occasion of your Purple Heart, what was that?
Well, it happened in what they called the Heart Mountains, and I had hurt my leg, or got hurt, and there was there was some fighting going on with snipers, and I was injured in my leg, and I had to go back to the hospital for.
Were you shot in your leg, or?
No, it was just the wound came in, and unfortunately it got infected, and so I had to be sent back to the hospital.
And how long? Which hospital was that? Do you remember?
Just a field hospital. I don't have any idea where it was.
And
I can't even remember where it was.
How long were you there? Do you know?
Just a couple weeks until they could get the infection cleared, and then I was sent back.
Back to you.
It wasn't a life-threatening wound or anything like that. But you never know, because the reason everybody went back at the Purple Heart, because we were front lines, and if you got hurt, and you were hurt in fighting.
Well, and I imagine if they didn't take you to a hospital, you could have developed gangrene or something.
Well, I did get infected. My leg swelled out.
Yeah. Can you tell me, what is the combat infantry badge?
It was given to the infantry. You remember Ernie Pyle?
Yes.
He wrote about the infantry, and I think he pushed the Congress and that to establish something for the infantry, because the Air Force, had all their things, and infantry had really nothing. And it was this next way to get a little extra money, and also it was a rifle. And recognition for the infantry.
Not having been through this, to help us to understand, can Can you capsulize what it was like to be sent as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old? And, I mean, obviously your unit fought bravely. Can you sum it up for me some way or give me some idea of what it was like for you?
It's kind of hard. I think, fortunately, everybody was young, and they didn't. you kind of get an attitude. You don't really care. You just do the job and try to get it over with, and so you can go home. But it's hard to summarize it. You get to living with people so closely, and you didn't know what was going to happen. So, excuse me.
It's funny you mentioned Ernie Pyle's book because I'm in the midst of reading it, one of his books right now, and he talks about having talked to some of the soldiers, people who would not think of killing, and in the beginning having to do that. By the end of their tour of duty, their attitude about it had changed so much. They had either become inured to it, or it never stayed the same. It changed in their minds. Did you find that to be your experience?
I think so. You wouldn't want to ever kill someone, but if they're shooting at you, and it's different. I never had to personally shoot anybody direct because I was in the mortars. So when we would fire the mortars, we wouldn't always see what happened when the mortars landed, which I think I'm probably thankful for, that I never had to actually kill someone directly. But we don't know if anybody was killed by the shells or not. They could have been.
Were you involved at all in the liberation of the concentration camps?
Dachau. We liberated Dachau.
And I'm assuming that was a very difficult experience for you.
Well, I didn't. Excuse me. I didn't personally get into Dachau, but we did see, some of the people, and it was pretty bad. I mean, you've seen pictures of the people in the boxcars and the ones that were living. What happened is that as the Americans came in, the Germans took off. They weren't going to stick around and be at Dachau when the Americans came, so they left. The people, just were free to roam around, and some of them were extremely thin, and of course there were a lot of dead bodies in Dachau. We kind of we didn't stay there too long because we had to go around it and go on and continue on to where we were going. But it wasn't really very pleasant. And they're not only Jewish people. They were people from Poland and Yugoslavia and those countries. And they were all sent at the concentration camps like Dachau.
Can you tell me one or two of your most memorable experiences while you were in the service?
I imagine probably the most that I remember was when the war in Europe had ended, and we were training to go to Japan, and then they dropped the bomb, and the war ended in Japan. I think that was pretty pretty nice, because then we didn't have to worry about fighting anymore. Go ahead.
What do you feel was your biggest achievement during the time of your service?
I really don't know. Biggest achievement, I guess, staying alive and getting home.
How did you stay in touch with your family?
Just letters.
And how often did you receive mail?
During the time when we were actually in combat, we never received any mail. and it would come in, and packages would come in. But anytime you had a chance to stop, then they would bring mail up, and you would get mail in packages that were sent.
So it probably was not very frequent that you were hearing from family members.
During the war, later on, after things settled down, it was more frequent.
You already told me the food was terrible. Did you feel a lot of pressure or stress when you were in the service? And if you did, how did you cope with it?
There was some pressure. Like I say, you just learn to live with it. We had a few of the fellows, it would just overwhelm them, and they had to be sent back. In fact, one of them was almost sent back even before we ever got into combat. It was just too much for him. So, but I think most of them, you just learn to, like I said, the stress, you just accept it. You had your part, and just live with it.
Did you carry anything or do anything for good luck?
Not really. Not really.
And what did you miss the most while you were in the service?
Well, I just miss, being at home.
Did you get any leave?
I had some leave before I was shipped overseas. We had to leave from North Dakota, and I had a few days when we were in Camp Gruber, and not enough to really go home, but you had a chance to get away for a little bit.
But when you were shipped to Europe, you never had any...
We had after the war, we had some of them. I was able to get a few days leave to go into Nancy, France. That's as far as any leave I really had. The rest of it, we didn't have too much. Some of them had leave to go into, London or Paris, and but that's as much as we had from where we were.
Did you like that a little better than Marseilles? Nancy, was
it was a little
nicer?
better, yeah. It was, things were, you could go and stay in a hotel if you had one, and you could get better food. And the countryside in France, was pretty beat up, and it was farming country, and it was different. I think it was a little less. I think the people in Germany, were a little more organized than they were in France, and the Germans were. Of course, the country was so destroyed. But Nancy was a lot better than Marseille.
Do you recall any unusual or humorous event?
Well, yes. There was a lot of places you'd go where you would run into, wine cellars, and I know a couple of times we ran into wine cellars, and it's kind of crazy. Everybody's sitting around drinking bottles of champagne, and there's nobody between you and the German. And one time we had a captain who used to load up his Jeep with cases of champagne if he could get a hold of them. And I know one time we were marching, and our outfit was the Jeep was right ahead of us, and someone would get a bottle and pass it back. I think we cleaned his whole Jeep out of all his champagne, and we had to stand guard duty over the Jeep.
Did you make any really close friendships?
Oh yeah, yes.
Can you tell me about one or two people that you became close to?
Well, the one that probably was the closest was from Pennsylvania. He was the one that was with me in a mortar. You had to have someone set the mortar up and drop shells in and things like that, and he was with me on the mortar. His name was Johnny on a skirmish. He was Russian. And when we got to Vienna, his being able to speak Russian came in very handy because if you know, in the occupation you had Russian, French, English, and Americans divided up cities, and they had all of them together in a town. That was in Vienna. I was in Vienna for about 6 months in occupation after the war ended.
Oh, and what were you doing there? What did you do? What were your duties when you were in Vienna?
Just see that things went along, because they had the city was divided into four quadrants, and the Americans had one, and we were had to keep everything peaceful and so forth, and stand guard duty in parts of Vienna.
How did you entertain yourself when you had any free time? I imagine there was time when it was monotonous, or...
Well, you just, of course, Vienna, being a city, you had a lot more opportunities to go out, and it turned out that one of my relatives had some relatives in Vienna, and I was able to visit them just once. They were lived along the Danube, and it was pretty beat up. I mean, the artillery wrecks the city. And I did get to visit them, and the rest of the time you just, they played cards, or you stood guard duty.
The people who were living there, were you treated all right? Was it,
I think they were very happy to see the Americans. I don't. They were hurting for food, and I think the Americans coming in, helped bring food, and they were friendly. You didn't wander too far away from the American sector, because you had the Russian sector, and you'd run into the different troops. It was wise to stay out of the Russian sector, because if they didn't like something at night, they would shoot. We didn't carry live ammunition when we were on duty. They didn't feel we needed it, and they didn't want people to get into trouble shooting somebody that they shouldn't be shooting. So.
Do you keep up with any of your buddies from that time?
They have we have once a year have a convention, which is coming up in July, and then in the wintertime they have an intermediate convention, so they have 2 a year. So that's a chance to go. I've been to several of them. I didn't start going right away. I thought that they would be like some of the things you run into, where they just go out and drink, but they weren't like that at all.
What did you think of the officers?
They were, to be honest with you, we didn't see a lot of officers, but the ones the high officers, they seemed to be pretty competent. The lieutenants came, and went. If someone got, hurt or wounded, or then we had replacements coming in. But most of the platoons were run by the sergeants.
And how about your fellow soldiers?
They seemed to be real good. I still remember a lot of them. But, unfortunately, as time goes by, they die.
Did you keep a personal journal or a diary?
No, I didn't. I should have, but I didn't.
Did you witness any really remarkable acts of bravery that stand in your mind?
Not outstanding. I mean, you had people helping each other, which would be acts of bravery, but I did nothing like they show you in the movies, where things like that. But and you had to, if people were wounded, you had to help them back, and things like that. I know that a couple of the artillery barrages, there's a lot of wounded people, and then you tried to help them, and the ones that got wounded. If it was a direct hit, you didn't help them, because they were gone. But,
do you recall the day that your service ended?
Well, I was when I was back in I I can't remember which camp I was discharged from, but it was in Indiana. And he just had an interview with, they had people set up to interview the people leaving. And they always write something about what you did in the service. I don't know what the reason for that was. I guess they thought that maybe it would help you get a job or something.
And what did you do? Did you go back to school, or did you go to work?
No, but there weren't very many jobs, and I went to school.
And where was that?
In Cleveland. It was what's called now Cleveland State. At that time, it was Fenn College.
And when you graduated, what did you go on to as a career?
And I worked for Honeywell in sales engineering.
And you're retired now?
Right.
Do you belong to any veterans organizations?
I did belong to the American Legion and the Veterans of Foreign War, but I don't belong to any of them now.
Did your military experience influence your opinion about war or about the military in general?
I think so, because you get that you just wish that people would get along, with each other instead of. I just can't understand why people, keep fighting and killing each other. It just doesn't make any sense.
What was the most important thing that you feel you learned from your military experience?
Oh, I think one of the things that you learn is that the United States is a pretty good place to live. And I think that you have to learn to get along with people instead of arguing and fighting and things like that.
Is there anything that you would like to add that we didn't cover in the interview?
I really can't think of anything. It's just that we're glad that that's over with.
I want to thank you very much for taking your time. It's been an honor to interview you. Thank you.
Well, thank you.